observing changes to our climate, with both warmer, wetter winters and more frequent intense rainfall. There is only so much hard flood protection we can install to protect buildings alongside rivers. It makes more sense to support natural flood reduction measures higher up their catchments. We all know that increasing the coverage of woodland is good for capturing more of our atmospheric carbon dioxide. It is even more the case that healthy upland peat acts as an effective carbon store. This country has a large fraction of this habitat worldwide, and many species rely on these spaces. The upland heath and moorlands of our country can also play their part in reversing the biodiversity challenge that has gripped us in recent decades. Our national parks and national landscapes must be accessible for all. We need to support sustainable transport options that give people choices in how to access these areas. We cannot have a situation where each year the car parks get larger and at the same time the bus and train services are cut. Relying on private cars as the only easy mode of transport to access our great national parks is not good for either those who live in those areas or for those who travel into them. Those of us who live and work outside of London have experienced 38 years of year-on-year decline in our bus services following bus deregulation in 1986. This has particularly hit rural routes, including into our national parks. We need better bus services for all, and that must include buses as a sustainable transport option to get people into and out of our national nature parks. Conference, our national parks and national landscapes can be so much better for all of us and can help mitigate the worst of our climate and biodiversity challenges. Please support the motion and both amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Will Ed Forom please stand by? And I now call Simon Pike, who will be speaking against the motion and against Amendment 1.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So last Friday, on my way to conference, I stopped for a walk along the South Downs Way in the National Park. The weather was perfect and the views were stunning, a great example of the value of national parks and other protected landscapes. Now, I'm a member of 3 statutory bodies with responsibilities for promoting access to the countryside. When I first saw this motion, I was therefore really hopeful. However, the more I read it, the more concerned I became. The motion calls for the creation of national nature parks, but it does not explain what these are, and neither did the past general election manifestos that mentioned them. There are already many types of designated landscape in the UK with different degrees of funding, types of management, provisions for access, and established under different legislation. The national parks, 2 different types of national landscape, national forest, access land, national and local nature reserves, and sites of special scientific interest, plus of course public footpaths, bridleways and byways. It's unclear how the national nature parks will differ or add to these, but it's clear from the motion that all of the £50 million of new funding would go to those national parks that wish to become national nature parks. None would go to the other national parks and national landscapes or directly to Natural England. Lines 42 and 43 call for the creation of 16 new national trails, taking the number to 32. However, there are already well over 1,000 promoted long-distance routes in the UK. One of the most popular is the Coast to Coast Walk, first described by Lake District legend Alfred Wainwright, which is not a national trail. This summer, I walked the Padilenta Trail in northern Sweden. 8 days of walking with a staffed hut every night. You can also wild camp almost anywhere along the route. Neither option is available in England and Wales, so walkers increasingly rely on expensive commercial support, making the walking a national trail a preserve of the well-off. The issue is therefore not the number of national trails, but the facilities along them. With more time, I could highlight further concerns with the motion. Therefore, with great reluctance and sadness, I feel that I must oppose the motion and ask that you two do so too. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Simon. Will Dan Boatwright Green please stand by? And I now call Ed Forom, who is our group leader on Derbyshire County Council, to speak for the motion as a whole.
Thank you, Conference. As mentioned, I'm the group leader in Derbyshire. We're the main host of the first national parks. Tim may have 2, we've got the first. I'm also the Unitarian worship leader in the village of Great Hucklow. I'm the first person in Britain who got engaged under Lynn Featherston's same-sex marriage, and I'm a walker of a husky dog called Sparky, who's watching now. As an out gay man, I agree with Tim Farron. But let's touch first on the Tories. In Derbyshire, they voted to change it from a climate emergency to a climate crisis. They wouldn't debate the national park when I proposed it. They didn't celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Peak District establishment. Under them, we have lost hedges, wildlife, wetlands, peatlands, and they have failed to arrest the disposable culture. National parks are important. Health, well-being, exercise, longevity. If you're in crisis or a dilemma, if you've suffered bereavement, the national parks are important. The Unitarian chapel I lead is in the middle of nowhere, Great Hucklow. We provide holidays for children who couldn't otherwise afford them. My forebears chose the national park. They knew the restorative effect of the national environment. We have a responsibility to celebrate and preserve them. On the 24th of April in 1932, Benny Goodman led 500 or so people in the Kinder Scout trespass. Tim cites the land. I cite Ewan McCall. I may be a wage slave on Monday, but I'm a free man on Sunday. It is time that we took national parks seriously, not just preserving the ones we have, but some new ones. Let me give you an idea. Lincolnshire, a national park that is coastal, from the Wash to the Humber, coastal reclamation, bird migration, something that touches in our national spirit. We should not leave the coastal communities of Britain to the prejudice of reform. We should recapture them. The story is grand. Pilgrim Fathers, Hanseatic League, Roman Fosdike, Dutch settlers. And the work of Liberal Democrat councillors, Andrew de Freitas, Leslie Rollings in West Lindsey, Ralph Pike in Boston, Claire Smalley in Lincoln, the foundations for a new Liberal national park across the Wash up to the Humber, it's all there waiting to happen. National parks are not for some, they are for all. For men, for women, faith or no faith, huskies and horses, straight or trans. The right to roam for all of us, for the future. The right to roam. What could be more liberal? Vote for the motion.
Thank you, Ed. Will Tony Vickers stand by? And I now call Dan Boatwright Green, the group leader on Wychavon, group leader on Wychavon Council, who will be speaking for lines 38, 44 and 57.
Thank you, and good morning, conference. Whenever I look at a motion that comes to conference, the first thing I like to do is find a practical use for it. And these 3 lines I picked out is because it will give me a lot to campaign on. 2 years ago in Fladbury, a small village in Worcestershire, 2 young teenagers ended up seriously ill as a result of swimming in the River Avon. It triggered a huge response from our local communities. And now, as a result, from Tewkesbury all the way up to Stratford-on-Avon, we now have some of the best citizen science you will find along a river. Every week, without fail, volunteers go out to their river to measure the levels of toxicity in it. And I have to say, it's vile. But I'm particularly proud of our WI groups who, whether it's raining, snowing, or flooded in some cases, will find themselves out by Piddle Brook in Piddle, had to get it in, testing the water and making sure we have the knowledge we need to be able to challenge what's happening in our beautiful spaces. But the problem is that the Environment Agency is seriously underfunded. The legal mechanisms are not working, and the data we collect is not used. And we need to show our residents that we have their backs. Because every week, without fail, I have people from 16 years old to 93 going out and testing that water. And they are absolutely awesome. In terms of our local nature recovery strategies, I know we like a tree. I know we do. But as a river dweller, I'd just like to give a big shout out to our wetlands and our meadows. They are so vital to making sure that we can actually renature my area. And at the moment, where we have housing targets that are, should we say, problematic, but I would probably want to say the word challenging, we need to make sure that we protect our landscapes and renature those areas that at the moment are looking a little barren. And I'm going to have to give a big shout out for peatlands as well. And finally, as the parliamentary candidate for West Worcestershire at the last election, where I think I'm one of the few people who can say they came second, which is quite a nice feel, Thank you. It's an area where, I'm not going to lie, we want a bit of a shout out to the idea of a nature park. The Malvern Hills is a fantastic area and something with very unique landscapes. The geology itself is so complicated that when you get to the surface, we have a series of biomes that most people would find fascinating and want to do PhDs on them. I'm not a biologist, so I'd rather not. But it's somewhere that really does need protecting, because at the moment it's at serious risk of harm. So I fully support this motion, and I really hope we can all do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Will Chris Northwood please stand by? And I now call Tony Vickers from West Berkshire and Newbury, who is speaking against the motion.
Conference, action for nature recovery is needed everywhere, and all this motion seems to do is to make our national parks the focus of it. As the Ramblers sponsored Access to Nature bill says, everyone needs access closer to home to somewhere that demonstrates how nature recovery is necessary. Not just for nature itself, but for all of us humans. We are part of nature, and modern urban life leads us to forget that. Nature is far more resilient than us. Look how Chernobyl has recovered. Look at any derelict site in your home area that has been left untouched by humans. I'm the representative of West Berkshire Council on the North Wessex Downs National Landscape, and its vice chair now. It's a partnership of 9 councils, 6 of them now held by us, and only 2 Tory and 1 Labour, and 5 Lib Dem MPs represent at least half of it. National landscapes have the same degree of responsibility as national parks for conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of their area. All councils with these protected areas now have an enhanced duty to seek to further this since last December. Not just to have regard to it, and we currently only have a fraction of the resources of the national parks with which to do that. I spent 20 years of my life as a holiday company volunteer walks leader. I've been to every national park and most of the national landscapes, interpreting the landscape for ordinary people as we walk through it. Only by educating the wider public about the need to protect nature will we get this political support across the country, and there are 28 Lib Dem MPs who represent significant parts of national landscapes now. So only by educating the wider public about the need to protect nature will we get that political support to sustain the existing resource and hopefully increase it far more than £50 million a year, Tim. We don't need a new designation, anything like as much as we need societal change in attitudes towards nature. We must see our role as stewards rather than masters of nature. I support both amendments, but I'm afraid because this term has never been before conference and approved national nature parks, and I don't know what it's going to do in addition to national parks, and it's focused on national parks, I'm afraid I'm asking you to vote against it. Thank you, conference.
Thank you, Tony. Will Jess Brown-Fuller please stand by? And I now call Chris Northwood from Manchester, who is summating for Amendment 1.
Thank you, Chair. You might be asking why a councillor from Manchester is up here talking about national parks. It's not exactly the thing our city is most well known for, but it's exactly why I'm here. Getting a train to Tim's constituency is something I do not that often, but when I do, I really appreciate it. Getting out to those national parks is something I really, really enjoy. Access to rights of way should not be taken away due to being hard to administer or bureaucratically inconvenient. The principle of access is important, and it's clear that the current system of declaring and registering that isn't working. Surely it's only right to remove the deadline and make it work. And I have sympathy with the argument that it complicates matters and this new system, this new proposal doesn't really actually help the existing things that already exist. It's clear that the mechanism being proposed here today will make things better, and let's not let perfect be the enemy of good. In proposing this amendment, Luke's made some really important points on the impact that our amendment will have and the risk of taking away routes, because although I know our charities have been working really hard in promoting the route registration mechanism, communities might have missed that because, it's hidden behind, the Beware the Leopard sign down the bottom of the planning office. Or we don't want them as people to lose things, because our broken public sector, and we do know the Tories have broken our public sector, they've dropped the ball in processing registrations. So, Conference, I ask you today to please support our amendment, both amendments, and the motion as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Finally, I'd like to call Jess Brown-Fuller, MP for Chichester, who will be summating for the motion as a whole.
Good morning, Conference. It is a pleasure to summate for this motion and for the two amendments, and I'd like to thank all of the speakers this morning, including my colleague and our environmental spokesperson, Tim Farron. You've all spoken very passionately in this debate, even after what I imagine was a fairly late night at Lib Dem Disco, so I appreciate your attendance this morning. Tim reminded us that this moment of renewal is vital for our national parks and spoke of our passion as a party for environmental and social justice. Luke then moved the amendment to ensure that access to public rights of ways are protected for generations to come to support well-being and mental health. Andy came on and moved the second amendment to highlight the importance of sustainable transport options to improve access to our parks. Simon made the point that funding must be spread across the existing national parks, which our motion does aim to do. Ed spoke of the restorative effect of the environment, and Dan spoke about community activism in being the custodians of our natural world. Tony then spoke about needing societal change for the environment, and Chris reminded us not to let perfect be the enemy of good. And I appreciate all of the inspired and passionate arguments here this morning. And it's wonderful to be in the beautiful constituency of Brighton for Conference, a wonderful part of Sussex, and one that shares a lot of similarities with my constituency of Chichester. Chichester is a coastal constituency, and it's home to not only a portion of the South Downs National Park, but also Chichester Harbour, which is designated as a site of special scientific interest, and it's a national landscape, a reflection of their national importance to protect the area from the threats of climate change, nature depletion, and the well-being crisis. But after 14 years of Conservative rule, and with our natural environment falling off the agenda completely in more recent years, it's no surprise that South Downs National Park, like other national parks, is woefully underfunded and under-resourced to be able to represent and preserve the very best of the natural beauty. And Chichester Harbour is officially in an unfavourable declining condition. The actions of the Conservatives fell far short of what was required to leave the environment in a better state than they found it. 1 in 6 species in Britain is threatened with extinction, a failure to protect their habitats and wildlife corridors, when the only species that should be threatened with extinction is the Conservative Party. So Liberal Democrats would prioritise nature by creating 3 new national nature parks, planting 60 million trees a year, doubling the number of national trails, providing additional funding to national parks, identifying a new wide belt for nature's recovery, strengthening environmental departments, and supporting, protecting our environment, including working collaboratively with our farmers, who are our nature's custodians. We only get one chance to get this right. So I urge you to support the motions with amendments today. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Jess. So we now move to a series of 3 votes, which the first couple of those are already open online. First, please can I see those in favour of Amendment 1? Thank you. And can I see those against Amendment 1? Okay, thank you. So that is very clearly passed. Now can I see all those in favour of Amendment 2? Thank you. And those against? Just a very few against. So again, that is overwhelmingly passed both here and online. Finally, can I see all those in favour of the motion as amended? Thank you. And can I see those against? Again, a small number against here. Just while we're waiting for the last online votes, I'd just like to announce that the emergency motion you selected in the ballot was the motion on the Grenfell Tower inquiry report. So, again, very overwhelmingly, the whole motion as amended by both amendments was passed. So I'd like to thank all the speakers in this passionate debate and those I was unable to call, and also my aide, Matthew Palmer, and my hall aide, Simon McGrath. And I now hand over to Chris Mains, who will chair the next session. Thank you.
Good morning, Conference. Welcome to F17, a policy motion on our plan to save the NHS. I need to start with an apology. We've had so many cards in. There are many worthy speakers who I'm afraid will not get called. Can I ask those people that are called to keep to the time, and we will try and get through as many speakers as possible. The motion has two amendments. Both are on the daily conference sheet. And I will invite Daisy Cooper, our Deputy Leader and Health and Social Care Spokesman, to move the motion.
I might be the wrong speech. Someone's left something here. Morning all. How are we doing? Late night then. Good morning. Now, Ed has rightly told journalists that this conference is all about health and care. And he's right. But for those of you who are regular conference goers, you'll know that our last few conferences have been about health and care too. At Spring Conference earlier this year, we were debating the Conservatives' failure to build 40 new hospitals, or should I say 40 new hospitals. We also debated and adopted a 5-year cancer plan to boost cancer survival rates. At the conference before that conference, last September, we adopted our plans to improve mental health and to transform the nation's health. And even at the conference before that, in March 2023, we agreed a plan to extend access to dental services and to fix the social care crisis. The fact is, conference, developing our health and care policies have been at the heart of our conferences for a while now, and when you look at our election result, it shows. Now, some of the naysayers may say that we simply benefited from the public voting in protest at a Conservative party mired in sleaze and failing to govern. Well, it was a factor, but certainly not the main one. Unlike the Conservatives, we listened to the public's concerns. We put our ideas forward and we set out how we would fix the country. And guess what? The country liked them. But don't take my word for it. When YouGov polled the popularity of all of the policies of the major parties' manifestos, the top 3 were Liberal Democrat policies. Our policies to boost cancer survival rates, to ensure everyone can see their GP when they need to, and to implement free personal care. These appealed to people across the country and topped the polls. But if that wasn't good enough, conference, there's more. It wasn't just the top 3. In fact, it was the top 8 out of the top 10. The top 8 policies were Liberal Democrat policies, and of those top 8, 5 were on health and social care. Now, some experts point out that policies don't necessarily decide the results of elections, and that's often true. But Conference, I have good news for you. That argument did not apply to our party in this election. And when those who voted Liberal Democrat were asked why they voted for us, the number one reason that voters gave for voting Liberal Democrats were our outstanding policies on the NHS and health more broadly. Now, let's be clear, Conference. This didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't happen in smoke-filled back rooms. It happens during our conferences, and it was made by you. Over the last few years, in conference halls and Zoom rooms up and down the country, we have debated, written and amended the policies that won us 72 MPs. And through our fun-loving general election campaign, we gave people hope that our NHS and care could be fixed. Now, when Ed did his stunts, they each came with a very serious message. When Ed did the slip and slide water slide in Somerset, he was raising awareness of our pledge to have mental health experts in every single school. But I have to confess, when I found out that Ed was doing the bungee jump on the same day I was announcing our bereavement policy, even I raised an eyebrow. Now, jokes aside, there is a reason that our manifesto and campaign resonated with people so well. The Conservatives spent their time in government driving our NHS and care into the ground. Years of mismanagement and incompetence have left our services on their knees, and it's patients who are paying the price. There are more than 6 million people still waiting for elective treatment, double the number in 2015, and the number of patients waiting longer than the government target of 62 days for urgent cancer treatment reached more than 100,000 people last year, the worst on record. Many are turning to A&Es in desperation when they can't get the treatment they need and relying on their GPs as their conditions deteriorate. Even then, they often struggle to be seen. And it's clear why. Despite the Conservatives' promise to increase the number of GPs by 6,000, the actual number has fallen by 500. And the damage goes even deeper. There's no escaping the fact that the state of our hospitals is terrible. Crumbling roofs, dangerous concrete, life-expired buildings are plaguing our NHS. GP surgeries, mental health buildings, all of our primary estate are facing similar problems too. Add to this the growing crisis in mental health services and that too many are forced to quit work due to long-term health issues. You could be forgiven for losing hope. Conference, we cannot allow this to continue. We cannot allow people to live in pain or distress, waiting for services that should be there for them when they need it. And we can't build the economy we need if health and care services are stretched to breaking point and people are just too sick to work. That's why this motion is so important. It sets out to the public and to the new government the Liberal Democrat plan to get our NHS and care back on its feet. There is no escaping the fact that it will take time to repair the damage the Conservatives have inflicted on our health and care services. Labour have made a start, and we appreciate that their inheritance is dire. But with social care and health services in crisis, more is needed. It is now our job to make sure that Labour sticks to the job of repairing the damage and delivering quality care for patients. That starts by pressuring them to fix our crumbling hospitals and to end the crisis in social care. The importance of a strong Liberal Democrat presence in Parliament is now clearer than ever, and we must ensure that patients know that we are fighting for them day in, day out. Conference, we will continue to highlight the Conservatives' dismal record in government and how they have failed millions of patients. We will highlight the fact that it was Conservative mismanagement that created this crisis, and it was Conservatives who did so little to tackle the growing issues our country faces. Conference, I urge you to support this motion and the amendments. Let's show the public we have listened and that we are committed to putting pressure on the new government to deliver the ambitious change our health and care services need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Can I ask Peter Lacey to stand by and call Stefan Cherkovich to move the First Amendment? Can I apologise to him that I didn't ask him to stand by?
Good morning, conference. One of two people in this hall will experience or have experienced mental ill health throughout their lifetime, and I'm one of those people. When my mum passed away suddenly in 2017, I went back home to organize her memorial service, and I thought that gave me closure and gratitude. My company was great, they sent me flowers, offered time off, but like so many, I just wanted to go straight back to work. When I started experiencing signs of depression half a year later, that support had actually melted away. That wasn't anymore there. And it is thanks to NHS talking therapies that I found myself again, week by week, in a calming therapy room. I was enriched by new life skills and a broader perspective on life at the end of the process. And I call this my mum's last gift. Today, I actually work in NHS England's mental health team, where I lead on capital investments to ensure that patients receive the care they need in the right environment. This motion rightly says, and I'm really thankful for it, that mental health should be put on the same footing as physical health. And earlier this week, the charity Mind, in response to the damning Darcy report, said that there is a fundamental problem with the distribution of resources between physical health and mental health. Mental health actually accounts for more than 20% of the disease burden, but less than 10% of NHS expenditure. And the Centre for Mental Health added that nowhere is the need for investment in the NHS so apparent than in the mental health estate, which it called unacceptably poor and untherapeutic. Untherapeutic. I think encapsulated in this word is both the problem and the solution. Perhaps in no other area in healthcare is there such a strong link between the space in which a patient is received, treated, and their subsequent recovery. Take the story of a friend of mine, for example, who had to discuss problems with addiction behind a so-called privacy curtain, but clearly was able to hear everyone around him. Another person may simply have not had the courage to open up in such a space. And there are countless stories of many inpatient facilities where dignity isn't maintained, sadly. Lord Darcy writes of 20 men having to share 2 showers and constantly broken laundry facilities, which makes it really impossible for them to maintain personal hygiene. So how are they going to recover? How are they going to regain their mental health well-being? And let's not forget, mental health capital saves lives. Many of the projects that cross my desk are about removing any suicide risk from the physical environment. So that's really, really important. Conference, I believe that every penny invested in a safe, warm, and welcoming environment will multiply the efforts of our mental health workforce, rather than making the hill steeper and steeper. Every penny invested will also be repaid manifold by patients able to return to work, having rediscovered hope. And hope must begin somewhere. With this amendment, we as Liberal Democrats also affirm the principle of community-based care, which lowers the barriers for diverse communities and shows that healthcare happens in the midst of life because it is a part of life. And now I want to invite you all to just have a look around you, the people that sit next to you. Most likely one of you will have been in the same situation as me with a different story, but very much the same. We all know what mental health and ill health means. So please, conference, give hope to those in need of safe and therapeutic mental health support and vote for this amendment and the motion as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Can I ask Prue Gray to stand by and call Peter Lacey from Harrogate and Knaresborough, who's going to move the amendment on funding hospices.
Good morning, conference. I prefer karaoke to disco, so I might see you late tonight, but not last night. And greetings from Harrogate and Knaresborough, the first Lib Dem gain to be announced on the 5th of July. And then there were 72. So good, I've got your attention. I'm holding a picture of my father with his first great-grandchild. If he had been born only a few years earlier, the chances of him seeing that day would have been seriously curtailed. In 1948, laying ill with rheumatic fever in the front room of their family home, he told me how he had overheard his aunt, who was a nurse, telling his mother that there was no fear of costs if Brian was sent to hospital now that the NHS was born. And of course, the rest is history. He lived a good life, supported by the NHS throughout with poor heart condition, but seeing his great-grandchild, his first great-grandchild. My family's experience illustrates the success of the NHS, but also an Achilles heel were we not to recognize and respond to it. When you bring together decades of improving life expectancy through to the early part of this century, baby boomers, many in the room, about to enter their 80s, and the more recent slowdown or even reversal of life expectancy, particularly in more deprived areas, we have a perfect storm brewing that needs addressing. Both the amount and nature of end-of-life care needs are growing significantly. The motion before us today rightly identifies our aging population as having an impact on how we design our health and care services. But there is something missing. Hence my amendment. It was in our manifesto, and I'm glad now that it's being supported as an amendment to this motion. It's one of the two certainties of life, death, and of course taxes. If our NHS is truly a cradle-to-grave service, then not responding to the growing needs of people in their last months and years of life is a failure in our social contract and undermines the very care needs properly, addressing end-of-life care needs properly makes sense. It makes sense in addressing the pressures highlighted elsewhere in the motion. 1 in 4 people have 3 or more hospital admissions in the last year of life. And the evidence that improved end-of-life care service can reduce these levels of admissions, as well as helping people to realize their wishes to die in the place they call home, is well grounded. And yet, the previous Conservative government failed to ensure that funding for the hospice movement kept pace with both the costs of care and the underlying growth in care needs. According to Hospice UK, at least 1/5 of UK hospices have either cut services in the last year or are planning to do so. The need is urgent. In his just published snapshot review, Lord Darzi says, society needs to restart the conversation about how to die well, with dignity, compassion, and preferences respected. And we, the Liberal Democrats, can lead that conversation. I therefore urge conference to support the motion with this amendment and the First Amendment, and in line with our manifesto commitment, as an important contribution to addressing pressures in our health and care system, out of respect for our older generation and in recognition of the value, skills, and dedication that our hospice movement and all those who work in it bring to those who deserve the best possible care as they approach and navigate the end of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Can I ask Wendy Taylor to stand by, and I call Councillor Prubray, who is Deputy Leader of Wokingham Council.
Good morning, Conference. I don't think I need to call on you to support the motion because we all know the NHS can't carry on as it is and it needs to be fixed. And we also all know that you can't fix the NHS without fixing social care. And as we said loudly and clearly during the general election campaign, that requires cross-party commitment to a national funding solution. It will take time to inject enough backbone into Labour and the Conservatives to tackle what both see as a toxic issue for them. But both of those parties know we cannot carry on as we are, yet both prefer to put off dealing with it. In the meantime, local authorities continue to have to bear the brunt of the costs. We simply do not have enough money to continue to do that for much longer. The cost of adult social care is one of the main factors cited by councils who feel themselves heading for the cliff edge of a Section 114 notice, the equivalent of declaring bankruptcy. So we now need a national solution for personal care to be implemented. On top of that, social care is in crisis as regards workforce. In order to try to meet not just forecast demand, but existing demand, we need to fill the vacancies in social care workforce, which stand at around 10% or 150,000. How can we do that when pay is so low and on the same level or lower than working in a supermarket? We need to see those pay rates increase. For those reasons, I particularly welcome lines 85 to 86 of the motion, which refer not just to that personal care solution, but also to having a higher minimum wage for carers and a workforce plan, covering all the things that are needed. But ALDC, of which I am currently the chair, believed that those lines were missing something. And that's why we submitted a small but very important amendment to what is an excellent motion, which we are very pleased has been accepted as a second drafting amendment. What our words do is point out that the government needs to fund the additional costs that will arise from the proposals to pay the workforce more. Council simply will not be able to find the money to fund that level of pay with the existing level of funding that we receive. Even more councils will be forced towards that Section 114 cliff edge. The addition makes it clear that what is needed is a national government response to the crisis in social care and not one that leaves local authorities yet again to pick up extra burdens with no additional money. Thank you.
Thank you, Prue. Can I ask Bobby Dean to stand by, and I call Councillor Dr. Wendy Taylor.
Conference. I'm speaking in favour of the motion, and particularly lines 68 to 70. For over 40 years, I worked as an NHS doctor. For 27 of those years, I was a hospital consultant treating patients with cancer. And I'm proud to say that in spite of all its problems, the NHS is still the best care system this country could have. Free care and treatment for all when needed. But of course, there are huge problems, as clearly spelt out in this excellent motion. Poor access to GP services, dental services and mental health care, and the shocking failure of the last government to sort out social care, leading to delayed discharge and delayed community care. But Conference, to say the NHS is broken is a huge insult to so many dedicated NHS staff who work themselves to death, unfortunately sometimes literally, to give patients the best possible care they could during the horrendous years of the COVID pandemic. So Conference, we need to make sure our NHS and social care staff feel valued and supported as we move ahead with the massive changes needed. For me, as a cancer specialist, making sure patients with cancer are diagnosed and treated promptly is absolutely vital. During my career, I saw massive improvements in treatment, new surgical techniques, new radiotherapy schedules, and new drugs which were more effective and better tolerated. And I saw in my own specialty of breast cancer patients living with advanced disease, sometimes for many years, instead of just a few months, as when I started. But such treatments can only be really effective if started early, and that's just not happening often enough at present. We need to boost screening and early diagnosis to make sure UK patients achieve the survival rates seen in the rest of the world. Liberal Democrats know what is needed to repair the damage to our precious NHS caused by the previous Tory government. Unfortunately, we also know that the new Labour government has already shamefully failed on tackling the social care crisis. So let's pass this excellent motion and both amendments and encourage our 72 MPs to put pressure on the new government to make sure that we have an NHS and social care system fit for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Can Crispin Acton stand by? And I call, and this gives me a great pleasure to say, Bobby D, Member of Parliament for Carshalton and
Thank you, Chris. Chris was one of the first people I met in the party 15 years ago, so thank you, Chris. Good morning, conference. I'm going to talk specifically to lines 48 to 52, where we talk about the relationship with the healthcare system and our public finances, and in particular, that invest to save model we've been talking about. This is absolutely critical. The Conservatives just don't get this at all. They're kind of blinded by their household budget analogies and these mantras that have driven our public services into the ground. And thanks to their short-sightedness and, frankly, callous approach to our NHS, we now have soaring rates of obesity, hospitals falling apart, and people out of work, or worse, dying, waiting for treatment every day. Conference, the Conservative Party should never be forgiven for what they did to our NHS. But here's my worry. The mood music from the Labour government so far has indicated they may not have learned enough lessons from the past. We are back to talk of tough decisions, reform instead of money, and the flotation of further private sector involvement in the NHS. Now, let me be clear. We should be open-minded about any proposal that could improve the delivery of our National Health Service. But I am sceptical. And I'm sceptical because so often these sorts of proposals are not put forward necessarily because it's what the government thinks is the best thing to do, but they are put forward in the supposed absence of money. And that's not good enough. And it's going to be down to us, the Liberal Democrats, to make that case. Not only have we set out how to pay for increased investment in our manifesto, we are also making the clear argument that when you invest in healthcare, you get a return on your investment. If you restore the public health grant, you'll get healthier people, less likely to turn up at the NHS's front door. If you rebuild our hospitals, you don't have to pay out a fortune in maintenance, repairs, and costly disruptions to services. And over the lifetime of the hospital, it will virtually pay for itself. And if you get the people the treatment they need, when they need it, where they need it, then you can get them back into the workforce, contributing to the economy and paying taxes. Oh, and there's also the small added benefit that you'll vastly improve people's health and well-being. Conference, nobody understands the value of healthcare like Liberals. It was David Lloyd George who introduced national insurance, and William Beveridge who laid the foundations to the NHS. And now, in this Parliament, it is on us to save it for future generations. Conference, we are the party of the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Can I ask Harry Mail to stand by, and I call Christine Acton from Redbridge.
Thank you, Conference. I've been a member of the party since 2001, but haven't spoken to Conference before. I should declare an interest. I am an expert advisor to the Institute of Alcohol Studies, which funds research and advocates for better policies on alcohol and health. And I want to talk a bit about public health in general, and how we need a much more preventive approach if we're really going to save the NHS. And this prevention can't all be done by the NHS. Some of it can be done by local government, but there is some that can only be done by central government. Those can be difficult policies, but I was very pleased that the motion does say that improving the health of the nation is as important as providing timely access to healthcare. And that improvement of life expectancy or improvement of the quality of life, the evidence is that about half of it, roughly, can be done in Western societies by health and care services. The rest is down to good policies on other areas like housing, helping people to live in warm homes, preventing air pollution, and so on. But a big part of it is also what we call commercial determinants of health, whether it's the tobacco industry or the alcohol industry or companies producing unhealthy foods, and those can really only be regulated by government. Self-regulation by industry has failed quite repeatedly since the tobacco industry was treated as a partner of government in the 1960s onwards. So even Lord Darcy has noticed that alcohol harm is rising, and it's a big priority, just like smoking and the obesity crisis. I do support the motion, but I'm just really making a plea not to forget some of these aspects of prevention. Thank you.
Thank you, Crispin. Will Ben Maguire please stand by? And I call Dr. Harry Mayle from Cardiff. Is Harry here? Let's hope he wasn't abusing alcohol last night. Therefore, can I call Ben Maguire, who is the Member of Parliament for North Cornwall and a first-time speaker to conference.
Good morning, conference. It gives me great pleasure to be giving my first speech to conference as the new Member of Parliament for North Cornwall. And it's such a privilege for me to be joined here today by a record 71 fellow Liberal Democrat MPs. As we now focus on becoming the official opposition, we must be more than just a critical friend to this Labour government, who have already demonstrated that social care reform is not top of their agenda. We must step into the void that the Conservatives have left us while they tear themselves apart. We must hold this government to account on healthcare reform. Coming from a family of Cornish healthcare professionals, I wanted to cover one issue in particular that comes up time and again across North Cornwall, which is the severe lack of dentists my constituents have access to. I've heard some truly shocking stories. The rotten Tory government left our children with a legacy of rotting teeth. It's all too common to meet constituents going through months of agonising pain, even resorting to pulling out their own teeth with pliers. All because they can't find an NHS dentist anywhere near them, nor can they afford sky-high prices of going private. Record levels of our children are being admitted to hospital with severe tooth decay, which in turn, of course, puts huge stress on our health services. One of my constituents told me she was told to either go private or make a 10-hour round trip to Nottingham for her treatment. During the election campaign, we pledged as a party fundamental reform of the NHS dental contract, which must now be a key focus for us moving forwards. But when working towards this, we need to ensure that dentists themselves are also given a fair deal and they're incentivised to do NHS work. We should now push hard in this Parliament to make sure everyone has access to a dentist when they need one. We should be fighting to reduce NHS waiting lists as a top priority for our constituents, bringing back quality, accessible dentistry that's free at the point of use for all. Conference, I urge you to support this excellent motion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Can I call Kelly Marie Blundell to speak? Sorry, I haven't given her time. Can I ask Gideon Amos to stand by?
The NHS is a British institution, but it's a crumbling institution. 2.5 years ago, my father had a heart attack and had to lay on a trolley in the corridor of the William Harvey Hospital in Ashford because there were no beds for 4 days. We come back again and again to conference to debate the NHS and say it desperately needs funding. But I say this personally, it's an entirely different thing when it affects you. Many of you will know the struggle of having young children and having ageing and unwell parents, and this is really hitting home for me at the moment. The other side of the problem with my father being on a trolley in a corridor is the so-called bed blocking. My mother-in-law was taken into hospital just 2 months ago. She was diagnosed with a terminal illness. We're desperate to get her home. We've been working really, really hard to take her husband to see her in Conquest Hospital, over an hour's drive from where we are. And we've been trying desperately to get caring in place. The biggest problem that I've seen from the NHS is the lack of combined and overarching thinking. My mother-in-law is well enough to come home with carers, but getting continuing healthcare funding has taken 2 weeks, which meant that she was doing what we all seem to loathe, bed blocking. That's why people like my dad have to lay in corridors, on beds, having had a heart attack, because the 2 units are not linking up. We need to see better combination working across the health and care sector, not just primary care, not just mental health care, not just caring support, not just primary care, but secondary care too. I want to see the Liberal Democrats committed to a better joined-up thinking to help make the British institution of the NHS viable again.
Thank you, Kelly Marie. Can I ask Simon Lepore to stand by? And I call Gideon Amos, Member of Parliament for Taunton and Wellington.
Thank you. It's a huge privilege to stand here this time as Member of Parliament for Taunton and Wellington, having recaptured the seat for the Liberal Democrats, which it should always, of course, be. Conference, the priority we gave to care and the NHS was the right one, and it still very much is, because it delivers on our liberal values, values of allowing people to lead the life they want to live and they love living. But with so many waiting on beds, unable to go home because they don't have the care, unlocking the back door of our hospital is the only way we'll ever be able to open the front doors and allow more people in for the treatment they need. And Musgrove Park Hospital in my constituency of Taunton and Wellington Conference is really struggling. 30 degrees heat in summer, medics fainting because of the heat, and in winter only relieved by buckets in the corridors catching the rain from the holes in the roofs. Buildings very much crumbling, which you might not say is surprising for buildings put up only as temporary buildings for the US Army in about 1940. This is not the state in which we can expect high-quality care to be delivered, and it's frankly an unacceptable state the last government left our NHS in, literally adding insult to injury for many of the patients in that hospital. But I want to highlight another big idea of our policy, our commitment to improving people's mental health. A mental health practitioner in every school, regular MOTs, an end to sending people far away from home, and walk-in centres, so we successfully prevent early on rather than try and treat when so often it is too late when it comes to the mental health problems and crises that devastate so many young people's lives. You heard it all from the Liberal Democrats first. And it is possible. Somerset NHS Trust is leading the way, the first to merge mental health and primary health into the same trust, and the first to see the real improvement in outcomes in terms of reduced serious referrals. The first to make that change, to bring mental health treatment out of the cloistered buildings of hospitals and into the community. So it's the right policy, Conference, supporting every individual, helping them get back their dignity, their hope, and a kind of freedom that many had forgotten. Be proud of that mental health policy conference, and let's keep talking about it and go out and bring back more and more Liberal Democrat colleagues so we have the Liberal Democrat government we want to deliver that policy across the whole country. Thank you.
Thank you, Gideon. Can I ask Lisa Smart to stand by? And I call Councillor Simon Lepore. Simon is from Trafford.
Good morning, conference. I've been feverishly editing out because it's nice to know we're all on the same page. You've taken up most of my speech. I've worked in health and social care for the past 23 years, and my mother qualified in 1976, and she's still going. She turned 68 this year, and she's running care homes in Lancashire. So I have a proud history of health and social care in my family, and it's true. It is on its knees, it is struggling, it is crumbling, and we're sick of it. I left frontline service after the COVID pandemic. I just had enough. I was exhausted, I was overworked, and now I manage social care in the community for those with learning disabilities and associated mental health problems. It's challenging. It's never a quiet day. It's never an easy day, but we get through. But one of the challenges we have doesn't necessarily come from the people we're looking after. It comes from dealing with that mismatched funding model that we're having to deal with all the time. Whether you're dealing with one council or another, different set of rules for this one, that one, there, every which way. Especially when you're dealing with people that have been placed with you from somewhere 100 miles away, because this is the only placement that would actually deal with that health and social care problem that that person has. So they have to travel. And that's the problem you see across mental health services, out of area care. When you've got someone who's from Manchester, can only get a mental health bed in Brighton. They've got no support, no family near them, and it stunts their recovery. So I love this motion. I love the amendments. What I want to see over the next year is probably a social care motion of its own, because there's so much we can talk about. So please support this motion, and I'll happily work with anyone on a proper social care motion separate to our hospitals, because it's a forgotten service, and I'm dealing with it every day now. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Can I ask Liam Anthony Elvish to stand by and call Lisa Smart, Member of Parliament for Hazel Grove.
Morning, thank you, Simon. Good to follow a colleague from Greater Manchester on the stage. I'm speaking in favour of this motion, but particularly lines 48 to 50. My colleague Bobby made the excellent point that health is an economic issue. It's not just a moral issue. It's not just a social issue. It's, as the motion says, it's a matter for the public purse. By allowing our health estate to crumble, and the motion talks very clearly about £12 billion worth of backlog of repairs, through that lack of capital investment, that's just cranking up the need for extra revenue spending, whether it's in mental health treatment that needs to be much more intensive further down the line because that early intervention took too long to intervene, or whether it's just somebody who could have had a much less invasive physical treatment early in their illness, they need far more later on. It just makes no economic sense. In my own patch, in the finest constituency in the land of Hazel Grove, we have Stepping Hill Hospital. Stepping Hill has seen so many crumbling buildings. Outpatients B had to be knocked down because it was no longer deemed safe. We've seen footage of medics having to wade through corridors to get to their patients because pipes have burst. And we have a bucket brigade, that's staff members with specific responsibilities with buckets when it rains. This leads to appointments being cancelled, treatment being delayed, and that just costs more. My constituents, our neighbours, deserve so much more. By not investing in public health, so whether it's smoking cessation, weight management, drug and alcohol problems, we're just making our population more unhealthy. And that costs all of us, more in the long term. By not fixing social care, colleagues have said we can't fix the NHS unless we do, but we also can't fix local government unless it gets the funding that is needed and unless we get the funding structures that are needed. I will be happily voting for this motion, and I'm very happy to support both amendments. We've got £2.5 million people, our fellow citizens, who are economically inactive because of long-term sickness. We need a plan, we need reform, and we need it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Will Jackie Bell please stand by, and can I call Liam Anthony Elvish from Runnymede?
Thank you. And it's my first time speaking at conference. Yes, thank you. Fellow Liberals, in Britain, 1 in 4 adults now suffer from some form of mental health condition. In Scotland alone, 700 people died from suicide in 2023. That's an average of 2 human beings per day. Yet despite this, the cynics remain, such as a certain Tory councillor I overheard at a local count earlier this summer, who uttered the words, "All this depression business, I swear it's all in the mind." It echoed the words of, up until this week, a Tory leadership contender who suggested that mental health had gone too far in Britain. Well, having suffered from depression and anxiety throughout my still relatively fresh adulthood, including a particularly horrific episode of psychosis in 2019, might I suggest to the aptly named Mr. Stride to increase his pace on this particular matter and manoeuvre himself towards the finish line of reality. The fact is that over the past decade, the British people have been failed in their mental health, failed by a bureaucratic concern with generalised monetary allocation to services, rather than actually achieving solutions on an individual basis within those services. Failed by a monstrous social media machine dictating to vulnerable teenagers how they should think, act, behave and dress, and on what image basis they are valid as a living, breathing organism. And unforgivably failed by that innate Tory inability to grasp the very simple relationship between mental well-being and educative and community resources, and the brutal consequences when you recklessly decide to cut such resources. Incidentally, in response to the scenes in Rotherham earlier this summer, we have no need for far-right thugs desecrating our public libraries. We've already had years of Conservative government doing that. While from my own personal treatment, I saw firsthand the difference that mental health services can make, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the NHS North Hampshire Early Intervention in Psychosis team for their superb support and treatment. There is nonetheless some way to go on this. The provision of talking therapies has fallen short, while prescriptions of antidepressants has skyrocketed. We have a dependency culture on medicative drugs, and while we know that too much screen time can be damaging for young people, we nonetheless have situations in which doctors are sending young patients in the direction of websites rather than the application of alternative remedies such as acupuncture and aromatherapy. And the new Labour administration now has a chance to change things. The 24/7 NHS mental health crisis line is a step in the right direction. But what we require to build on this progress is compassion, flexibility, and knowledge, because we're dealing with the mind. And what is the mind? Delicate, precarious, complex, part of our diverse makeup. It requires input from different parts of the national body, in Whitehall and in local government, in private industry and the domestic household. And now, thanks to the superb leadership of Ed Davey and Daisy Cooper and our new 72 fantastic MPs, we're championing the importance of mental health on parity with physical health. We need more counselling, not cancel culture, more well-being, not more websites, and more compassionate employment as we champion the tenderness of the individual human mind against the cruelty of submission and ignorance. And I urge you to support this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I hope we don't have to wait too long for your second speech to conference. After Jacqueline Bell's spoken, I'm going to call Clive Jones to summate on the motion. We won't be having summations from 2 amendments because no one's opposed them. Sorry, Jackie's from East Lothian.
Right. Conference. The Scottish Government are failing on the NHS and social care, much as the SNP like to blame Westminster. In 2010, when East Lothian Cabinet Member for Health and Social Care, I warned Health Minister, now Scottish Finance Minister, Shona Robertson, that her reshaping the balance of care agenda would fail. The hospitals and care home beds should not close without investment in the community care services she proposed to replace them with. I was right. We've seen cuts locally and across Scotland to both NHS and local authority services. This spring, East Lothian Health and Social Care Partnership had to make £12 million cuts. In York, I told conference that 2 council care homes and 2 community hospitals were under threat. On 28th of March, despite community concerns, protests to keep them open, they were closed. This has been devastating, particularly in Dunbar. After Belhaven Hospital was saved in 2009, we repeatedly promised it would not close until replacement facilities were in place. Our former councillor, now SNP MSP, said the Dunbar SNP would never agree to downgrading of facilities of Belhaven, but he stood back, saying the facilities were not fit for purpose, and yet NHS Lothian had just spent £1 million on upgrading it after sorting out water problems caused by Legionella. Those most impacted were the residents of Blossom House Care Home on the site. They were moved overnight, supposedly temporarily, after a fire in the grounds, and they were moved to Haddington. The closure decision meant they could not go home. They all had to be placed elsewhere. Distressing. Dunbar now only has 1 care home, despite the growing population. You might have seen the story by Helen Puttick in the Sunday Times. The loss of downstream hospital and care home beds puts pressure on the acute sector in Edinburgh hospitals. It's harder to find care home places. Care at home is also hard to obtain, even if you can pay, and particularly in the rural parts of Dunbar and East Linton ward, where public transport is limited. Care agencies don't find it economically viable to give a service there. This all adds to bed blocking. In 2010, Shona Robinson aimed for 0 delayed discharges. There are now thousands waiting in hospitals across Scotland who don't need to be there. They just need the care services. And we've all been talking about the need for joined-up thinking. The Health Minister, in response to a letter, told me he couldn't intervene. However, the SNP are currently spending millions on a much-delayed, flawed National Care Service, a centralised power grab. Scottish Liberal Democrats and others have all been calling for it to be scrapped. The money would be better spent on frontline services so desperately needed now. Belhaven is sitting there with NHS and care home beds, space for palliative care, a community care staff hub, a vaccination centre, a community garden that we're trying for a community asset transfer to save. It could all be better used if we had that money now for the front line rather than leave Belhaven and other community hospitals with a very uncertain future. A Taylor Wimpey waiting on it? Who knows? Thank you. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm going to call Clive Jones, Member of Parliament for Woking, to sum up. After Clive's spoken, we move to 3 votes, one on each amendment and then on the main motion.
Good morning, Conference. It is an honour and a privilege to address you for the very first time as the first ever Liberal Democrat MP for Wokingham. And to summate on this fantastic motion on such an important issue. I care about the NHS deeply. It was an NHS cardiologist who found my need for a quadruple heart bypass in 2016. So excuse the pun, but the NHS is literally close to my heart. This debate has demonstrated so movingly that health is one of the core issues in our lives and one of the reasons why the British people voted for change on July the 4th. We have heard emotional speeches about how our healthcare system simply doesn't work for patients. The consequences of neglect, the pain, the struggle, the despair, and the loss of hope. And I can only thank those who spoke so movingly for their confidence and eloquence on what will always be a difficult subject. Now, like everybody else, I have a story to tell, as well as my heart issue. In 2008, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And looking back on my personal experience of the NHS, I can only be grateful and thankful for the service that I received. And yet speakers have comprehensively demonstrated the Conservatives have run this NHS into the ground. The Conservatives should be absolutely ashamed of their stewardship of our precious NHS. This week, Lord Darcy made it clear in his report that the NHS is in serious trouble. And sadly, it didn't surprise me to read in his report that there were so many failings in cancer care. It made me angry when I read how our services are so far behind other countries. Conference, I'm so frustrated that the Conservatives have put the NHS into intensive care. I am lucky to be standing here today. If it weren't for the NHS, I would not be here today, and I wouldn't be the Member of Parliament for Wokingham. And that is why we are presenting our plan to save the NHS. It is important to me, as it is important to so many of you. The contributions in this debate were really important. Stefan and Liam, they're absolutely right. Mental health should be put on the same footing as physical health. Peter, you're right. Hospices absolutely need to be funded properly. Prue, absolutely right again that we need to fix adult social care. And the government must provide the funding for this, not local councils. Wendy Taylor, our system is broken, but we have the most wonderful and dedicated NHS staff. We are really lucky that we have them. And Jackie, you got it absolutely right. The SNP and the Conservatives are just as bad as each other. Bobby Dean, quite right. The Conservatives must never be forgiven for what they have done to the NHS. And Crispin, well done on your first speech. It's good to have your experience in the Liberal Democrats. And Ben, so right to highlight the lack of NHS dentists. This is right across the country. And Kelly Marie, I'm really sorry to hear that your father had to wait for 4 days after he'd had his heart attack. That should not be happening in 2024. As Daisy said, the Liberal Democrats will hold the Labour government to account, just as we did the Conservatives. The Labour Party claim they are the fathers of the NHS. But conference, it was Liberal ideas put forward by William Beveridge who created the blueprint for the NHS. It was his idea, and now we are following in his footsteps to ensure that Labour adopt Liberal Democrat policies to fix the crisis in the NHS. Conference, I'm sure that you will join me in voting for this motion and supporting the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clive. Okay, so we're moving to the vote on Amendment 1 on mental health. Can I see all those in favour? Thank you. And those against? That is overwhelmingly carried. Amendment 2 on hospice funding. Can I see those in favour? Thank you. And those against? That too is overwhelmingly carried. So can we vote on the motion as amended? Those in favour? And those against? We're just waiting for those at home to be voting. Okay, that is clearly overwhelmingly carried. Thank you very much for everyone who spoke. Again, I apologise to those people that weren't called. Can I thank my aide, Emma Kelly, and the aide in the hall, Callum Robertson. Handing over to Hannah Kitchen. I apologise for overrunning, and she will be dealing with F18, the topical discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, conference, and welcome to item F18, which is a topical issue discussion on Labour's economic policy and the foundations for long-term prosperity. You'll find this item on page 14 of Conference Extra or on page 6 of today's Conference Daily. Please note that this is a topical issue discussion and not a policy debate. And so, on that basis, there will be no voting at the end of the session. Can I ask people to move to their seats quickly, please, so that we can start this session, as we're also already a little behind time? Can I ask Sarah Olney to stand by? And I now call Duncan Brack from Lambeth Local Party to propose the issue.
Just interrupt. Thank you very much, Hannah. Now, conference, we love policy debates in this party. We're great about talking about climate change or civil liberties or health policy, but we very rarely debate economic policy. So I'm pleased that this topic was chosen, Labour's economic policy and the foundations for long-term prosperity. This is our chance to signal to the FPC and the Parliamentary Party the issues we want them to work on over the next few years. And this is a critical area. We have to address economic policy if we're to be credible on all the other policies we promote, on health service or care or cost of living. And we also have to address economic policy because it's clear that the UK is facing huge challenges in the decades ahead. Growth in the population, particularly in the number of over 70-year-olds, damage to the economy from climate change, demands for better public services are all combining to place unsustainable pressures on the public finances, with governments forced to choose ever less popular combinations of tax rises and spending cuts, which in turn risks undermining people's belief in the ability of politics to deliver meaningful change. It is impossible to escape from this trap unless the economy grows, unless the amount of wealth generated by each worker in Britain or by each unit of resource consumed, productivity, increases. Now, Labour recognises the challenge, at least. The first of their 5 missions included in the manifesto is to secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. But fearful of the right-wing press and of losing another election, they have wrapped themselves in 2 straitjackets, which will mean they will fail. The first Labour straitjacket is their commitment to Tory fiscal rules, which oblige them to ensure that public debt will be falling as a proportion of GDP in 5 years' time. But these rules largely ignore the outcome of government borrowing, the impact of it. They do not recognise the assets created by public investment, whether these are tangible, railways, power grids, hospitals, or intangible, intellectual property, data, code. Nor do they recognise investment in natural assets, such as clean water or clean air. One of Rachel Reeves's first decisions, alongside restricting winter fuel payments, was to cut investment in rail and roads, which directly counters her own government's growth mission. As Andy Haldane, former chief economist at the Bank of England, put it, Adhering to existing fiscal rules risks underinvesting today in tomorrow's economic and environmental health. Debt-based fiscal rules dent growth, weaken macroeconomic resilience, and amplify the doom loop. Liberal Democrats need to argue for a different approach to investment, based on the true net worth of the country and its tangible and human assets. Labour's second straitjacket is their refusal to contemplate stronger economic ties with Europe, ruling out a customs union or membership of the single market. Again, this directly counters their mission for growth. Brexit is acting as a permanent brake on the UK economy. As we said in the policy paper that Conference supported 2 years ago, if you erect trade barriers, trade will be harder. If you cut the workforce, there will be fewer people to do necessary jobs. By the beginning of this year, the average Briton was £2,000 worse off, productivity was 4% lower, and government revenue was £40 billion less than it would have been without Brexit, an amount, you will realise, that's almost double the size of the government's famous black hole in the public finances. Now, we know the solution to this. It was at the front of our election manifesto. Liberal Democrats will immediately fix our broken relationship with Europe, forge a new partnership built on cooperation, not confrontation, and move to conclude a new comprehensive agreement that removes as many barriers to trade as possible, which must mean single market membership. And this is another opportunity for us to show leadership, to highlight Labour's failures and push them in the right direction. Now, I know we didn't talk about any of this in the election campaign, and I understand why. You start with where people are, with their everyday concerns: health, cost of living, care. You start there, but you don't stop there. If we are serious about presenting an alternative vision, a credible programme for delivering the services that people want, the healthcare they need, the investment necessary to tackle the climate and nature emergencies, we have to show how we would manage the economy. This is an opportunity for us to set the economic agenda, to show how the foundations for long-term prosperity can be truly laid. And I go further. This isn't just about increasing the Lib Dem poll rating or winning more seats in the next election, though I think it can do that. We have to show that democratic politics can deliver prosperity for all, not just riches for a few. Because if we fail, and Labour are setting themselves up to fail with their fiscal and EU straitjackets, if we fail, we risk handing the country to the populists with their easy slogans, their scapegoating, and their contempt for democracy. That's our challenge. I think we can rise to it. Thank you.
I now ask Rob Rice to stand by, and I call Sarah Olney, who is the MP for Richmond Park and our party's Treasury spokesperson. Sarah is speaking in response.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Conference, and thank you particularly to Duncan for opening the discussion on this extremely important issue. Conference, this summer we've managed to defeat one of the worst Conservative governments in recent memory, a government that will go down in history as one of the most damaging our country has ever seen. It wasn't just their catastrophic mini-budget. They oversaw a vicious cycle of stagnation and recession driven by years of chaos and uncertainty. For the first time, living standards declined over the course of a parliament as people went through the harshest cost of living crisis in generations. And our public services were abandoned, soaring hospital waiting lists, crumbling schools, and social care in crisis. And they left behind a legacy of damage and neglect, touching practically every aspect of our economy. And of course, this includes the public finances. The precise scale of the hole they blew in the Exchequer might be up for debate. The current government claims it's £22 billion. Some experts argue that it's less. What is not up for debate is that their mismanagement has cost our country billions, leaving our finances in a precarious position. But Conference, Liberal Democrats are clear. This difficult legacy is not a blank cheque for the new government to make the wrong decisions. We have shown that we will always speak up when the wrong route is being taken, and that's exactly what we've done in the first few weeks of the new Parliament. Take the winter fuel payments, for example. We simply did not accept that this was the government's only option. So we stood up for all the struggling pensioners who might fall just a few pounds short of qualifying for support and who are now worried sick about the cold months ahead. Or look at social care. The previous government postponed and never properly funded its proposed reform, eventually turning it into yet another broken promise. But we made clear that leaving social care in crisis is not an option. So we have been pushing the government to urgently start cross-party talks to put social care on a sustainable footing. And we've stood firm in our belief that you can't fix our public services, grow the economy, or stop climate change by cutting investment. In the last few weeks, we've warned ministers about the perilous state of our infrastructure, and we've called on them to urgently launch an industrial strategy, setting out how to address our economy's many investment needs. But we're not here just to provide constructive opposition. We are here to lead with our ideas and promote our vision for a fair, prosperous, growing economy. The vision set out in our manifesto, which earned us the trust of millions of voters and made us the largest third party in 100 years. We understand that being fiscally responsible and making vital investments needn't be in conflict with each other. They must go hand in hand. That's why we set out a bold plan to invest in our country's capital, to boost schools, hospitals, social housing, and we called for vital investment in home insulation, renewable energy and green transport to grow our economy while tackling the climate emergency. We are the only party with the ambition of fixing our broken relationship with the EU. We want to see Britain back at the heart of Europe, and we are making the case for a better deal for British businesses in the here and now. The new government is wrong to rule out the single market as an option for the future. If you're serious about growing the economy, mending those ties of trust and trade is one of the most powerful things you can do. We were the first to recognise that a healthy economy requires healthy people. So we proposed the most ambitious plan of any party to end the crisis in our NHS and social care by delivering more GPs, cutting A&E waiting times, and backing free personal care. And we made clear that you don't balance the books on the backs of hard-working families. You do it by asking the big banks, the social media giants, the oil and gas producers to pay their fair share. Conference, there is no doubt that the Conservative Party left our economy in a mess. Stagnant growth, struggling public services, slipping living standards. People will never forget the damage they've done to our country. But we are clear that this difficult legacy can't be an excuse for the wrong decisions. And as Liberal Democrats, we will always fight for our own economic vision, for fairness, responsibility, investment, tackling the climate emergency, and giving people a fair deal. These are the values that people trusted us for, and these are the values we will always champion. Thank you, Conference. I look forward to hearing your contribution.
Can I now ask Paul Noblet to stand by, and I call Rob Rice from Sheffield Local Party. Just before Rob starts, I'd like to let Conference know, because we haven't taken one of these topical issue discussions for a while, that the discussion will be concluded by a representative from the Federal Policy Committee, and all of the topics raised in the discussion today will be taken forward for future work by the FPC.
Am I good to go? Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. I'm sure that we'll hear plenty in this agenda item from economists about the fundamentals of Keynesian thinking, economics, and its history within liberal tradition. But for the communities like the one that I represent in East Ecclesfield and Sheffield, the communities that I stood for in the general election in Penistone and Stocksbridge, and also for my colleagues and fellow steelworkers across South Yorkshire, it's not something that we study, it is an experience that we live. When we build train lines, it helps us get from A to B, but it's also putting money back into the pockets of steelworkers in Scunthorpe and in South Wales. When we build more bloody houses, we're supporting brick manufacturing in every community up and down this country. I could go on pointing out everything that we should be building, that we should be doing, because it helps put money back into the local economy and supporting jobs. But it lacks ambition. It is the thing that we should be doing because that's what governments do. This Labour government has been criticised as being cautious, verging on austere. And whilst many of us know about the winter fuel payments and what that is doing to our older residents, the one thing that flashed up to me in the same announcement was a cancelling of £1.4 billion worth of investment into AI research, including £800 million for a new supercomputer in the University of Edinburgh. Now, you might think, okay, what's that got to do with it? But we should be ambitious in how we invest in blue sky thinking in the future, because we can build, but that only gets us short-termism. What we should be doing is approaching smaller companies. We should be approaching people with big ideas, but might take a little bit more time to be there and say, no, we trust you. We want you to do well. Sheffield is home to the AMRC, the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, where businesses, large and small, can work with the university on ideas that they're not entirely sure will work, but they just want to have a go. We should be funding that. The British state, we don't have to think quite so much about short-term gains. We should be looking at things that we can invest in that might or might not work, because maybe that will be the next big Facebook, the next big Tesla, or chip manufacturer. We should have ambition beyond just what will be able to make money in the short term, because that's what governments are good for. That's what puts money back into the pockets of not only steel workers, but also researchers up and down this country, making prosperity for everyone. Thank you.
Can I now ask Callum Miller to stand by, and I now call Paul Noblet from Waltham Forest.
Good morning, conference. I've only ever spoken once from the podium at conference, and that was to move the policy paper in 2019 called A Fairer Share for All. As some of you may remember, that looked very much of how we put in place a safety net to catch people at the most difficult times in their lives, but it also began to focus on how we support people beyond that into work and into their own prosperity. And two groups I just wanted to really highlight this morning were homeless people, particularly homeless young people, and also those who do not have a choice in the work they do because they simply cannot afford to commute to jobs other than the ones right on their doorstep. 5 years ago, these were areas that were really crying out for investment, and that need is even more pressing today. For more than a decade, I was privileged to be able to advocate for homeless young people through the charity Centrepoint, to make the case for affordable housing, to make the case for more generous universal credit. But it was also an opportunity to remind MPs and civil servants that the homeless young people who needed our support today had the potential to be the engineers, the programmers, the architects who will shape our future prosperity. So, conference, what is the investment that's needed today for us all to prosper tomorrow? Well, of course, we need to start by building more homes, as previous speakers have talked about, but also we need to start by widening horizons. For those young people to leave homelessness behind, to turn their lives around, to get on with their lives and achieve their ambitions, we need a careers service that does more than just tick boxes. It suggests what are going to be the jobs of the future, and how do you get into those jobs. We also need to be a country where apprenticeships are taken much more seriously, and we need a benefit system where the focus is on progression, not punishment. Conference, we also need to invest in public transport to break that link that some employers have over local populations where they have the choice only to work in their closest employer and not to be able to move to achieve their ambitions. Conference is also about widening our horizons beyond the English Channel, and as members have already spoken, we need to be looking beyond the youth mobility scheme that we talked about yesterday and into rejoining the single market. Conference, in July, we destroyed the myth that the Conservatives are the party of prosperity. We now face a different challenge. Conference, if we want to grow our prosperity, we need to grow the optimism and ambition of this Labour government. As Liberal Democrats, we are hopeful and we are ambitious for our communities. That's why we are arguing for investment now in health and social care, in our environment, in our public services. For 14 years,
please draw your remarks to a close.
Conservatives' critic. During this Parliament, let us be Labour's conscience and put our country back on the path to prosperity. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you. Can I now ask Lauren Thomas to stand by? And I now call Callum Miller, who is our new MP for Bicester and Woodstock.
Thank you very much, Conference, and I'd like to thank Duncan for presenting the opportunity for us to discuss this really important topic. I want to focus on the fiscal policy dimension that Duncan spoke about. Because, Conference, when it comes to the Conservatives and Labour, we've just seen what I would consider to be the most dishonest election in recent times when it comes to the public finances. The Institute for Fiscal Studies described a conspiracy of silence from the two main parties, and I'd go further. I think it was a conspiracy of complacency from them both. The only thing they agreed upon was a commitment to a public spending squeeze on the other side of the election, not that either of them put that in lights. It was only the Liberal Democrats who put forward an approach that would invest in health, social care, schools, and helping the most vulnerable, and that we would do that by taxing those with the broadest shoulders. Now, as we look ahead to the next month or so, the 30th of October is a key date when Rachel Reeves, as Chancellor, will set forward her budget and spending review. And whilst this is a debate about the longer term, I think it provides a good lens through which to think about the fiscal policy that we might want to be advocating for as Liberal Democrats. Because our country faces three challenges in that regard. It faces the challenges of restoring our public services, of finding a suitable way to make sustained investment in capital, and fundamentally on how to drive growth in the economy for the reasons that Duncan set out. So on public services, everywhere we look, there are challenges. The list of services brought to breaking point by the Conservatives is legion. On capital investment, Labour's disciplined repetition of a 22 billion black hole is a nice soundbite, but it has an immediate consequence because that is an in-year shortfall, and that means on the 30th of October, there is every chance that Rachel Reeves will make further cuts to the capital budget with all the impacts that will have on future productivity. And finally, we're left with a growth conundrum. This is a new government that said its ambition was growth, to grow our economy, and yet retrenching as hard as we expect it to do on the public finances leaves very little room for any measures that are really going to drive forward that growth. So we as Liberal Democrats have the opportunity to put forward distinctive proposals. Our commitment to investing in health and social care, not just because of all the great reasons that were highlighted in the last debate about the difference it will make to people's lives, but because when people are able to get swift treatment in hospital and return to work, and when people are not struggling to continue their working lives, that will help the economy. We will also focus on prevention in public services. We need to find a way of shifting expenditure, as we've discussed in many other debates this weekend, to preventing the costs that will come in the future. And we need to invest in capital that will drive productivity. Duncan's quite right to say that we should be looking at a much broader understanding of the net worth of public assets so that we can have a more intelligent interpretation of investment when it comes to public services. Conference, we as Liberal Democrats should be putting forward an approach that takes a long-term view, not short-term cuts that make the challenges worse. We should be setting up fiscal policy for real recovery and an economic policy that restores public services and builds for the future. I really look forward to working with many of you in realising a policy like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now ask Robert Harrison to stand by? And I now call Lauren Thomas from Islington Local Party.
Good morning, Conference. I'm an economist, and I was excited to see Labour focus so much on economic growth and prosperity in this election. But I think there's a lot more that we as Liberal Democrats can do as well. And there's really three areas that I think we should focus on: infrastructure and housing, labour market regulations, and human capital. So I'll be brief about infrastructure and housing because if you remember me from last year, I like to talk a lot about that. Government spending is not equal, and infrastructure is one of the best things that we can invest in. But UK infrastructure is poor and it's overly expensive. For example, our metro building costs are second only to my home country of the US. And putting housing in the right place, that means where people actually want to live, not just where the government is comfortable putting them, is essential to ensuring long-term economic growth. Take science, it benefits hugely from what economists call spillover growth, aka being near other scientists. And that means they need labs to work in, trains to commute, and of course, homes for those people to live in. Labour has rightly focused on these issues, but they can have a damaging illiberal streak. When it comes to labour market regulations, the UK has a relatively dynamic labour market and flexible regulations. Labour's proposal to make unfair dismissal rules apply from day one is a big mistake. It sounds good, but it will make employers much more likely to hire on fixed term rather than permanent contracts. and much less likely to take a chance on groups disadvantaged in the labor market, the young former prisoners and those from marginalized backgrounds. It's no coincidence that youth and minority unemployment are far higher in countries where labor market regulations are stricter, like France and Spain. The Lib Dems would be far better served by supporting people directly through better unemployment insurance. Job seekers allowance is only £90 a week. Did you all know that? Rather than trying to externalize the costs. And lastly, not a controversial issue at all, immigration and human capital. Labour has backed away from expressing support for migration, even though the UK is in an extremely fortunate position here. The Entrepreneurs Institute found that 39% of our 100 fastest growing startups have immigrant founders. But we put a lot of red tape and costs in the way of our migrants. The Global Talent Visa costs a minimum of nearly $4,000 and can reach over 5 figures. We should reduce fees for our most highly skilled and paid immigrants, and we should expand the high potential individual visa to cover more universities. As for human capital, focusing on specific job shortages is short-sighted. This is likely to change massively in the next decades. Artificial intelligence has the potential to be transformative, and government would be best served not by thinking about specific jobs, but by thinking about ways to support people and reduce negative impacts. For example, economists Helen Roy, Emma Casey, and Emma Rockwell have suggested AI bonds and AI citizens. This is a way to ensure that citizens are enjoying the fruits of AI, and it's not just the richest. Another option is supporting paid job retraining, like the recent agreement with
Can you please draw your remarks to a close?
Despite what my fellow economists say, there is a such thing as a free lunch.
I'm sorry, can you please draw your remarks to a close? Thank you. Can I now ask Will Stackwell to stand by, and I now call Robert Harrison from Liberal Democrats in Europe.
Thanks very much indeed, Duncan, for organising this debate, because I think it's highly topical. I want to speak to you today as a small business owner that is active in the UK, in France, and in Germany, and to talk to you about some of the problems that we are actually encountering at present with the current situation. The House of Commons reports that there are 5.5 million small businesses in the UK. 61% of UK employment is based on small businesses. That's something we've forgotten. It also seems to be something that Labour Party has forgotten, because they are encouraging donorships from large businesses. We need to be supporting the small businesses in this country. Why are small businesses failing? In 2022, the latest statistics, more businesses closed than were actually opening. Now, there are various reasons for that, obviously. Some people may talk about COVID, but one of the largest reasons for that is the lack of export opportunities into Europe. The Office of Budget Responsibility has shown that compared to the rest of the G7, the UK export market is falling for goods. Services may be slightly different, but that's one of the reasons why we really need to support Sarah Olney and her campaign to rejoin the single market, because that's the most important thing that we can achieve in order to get the exports to Europe running. Recently, living in Germany, I had to pay €109 to the local postie for a product that I organised port from the United Kingdom. The product itself costs almost €100. I paid roughly double. Now, people will say the customs duties are not that high. Of course they're not that high. But Deutsche Post, the German postal service, obviously levied their own administration charge. 5 years ago, I had to pay nothing. It came within a few days. This product came within 2 weeks. The last thing I really want to talk to you is to highlight also the issue that the previous speaker talked about, some of the labour restrictions that Labour are proposing to put into place. We need to be really thinking about it. It sounds fine to increase employment protection, to overcome some of the disastrous policies that the Conservative put in place. But we need to do it to ensure that small businesses are actually able to employ people from outside Europe, young people, disabled people, people from ethnic minorities in this country. And by increasing labour protection laws, we will actually have this problem as well. I could go on about the challenges that I've had in employing people from outside the United Kingdom in the UK, and also some of the challenges of employing British citizens who deserve to be able to work in Europe. I talked about that yesterday in your youth mobility. My previous speaker talked about it, and therefore I will not go into it, but it's something that I believe that our party needs to do in the future to be able to ensure prosperity.
Please
Thank
draw
you,
your
Conference.
remarks up. Thank you. Can I ask Richard Kilpatrick to stand by? And I now call Dr. Will Sackwell from Sheffield Local Party.
Chair, Conference, colleagues and friends, I'm used to focusing on the individual. I'm a Liberal and a doctor, and I'm certainly not an economist. But let's look a little more macro. The UK has got some of the worst sickness absence rates, and the stats are only getting worse. It's therefore reassuring to hear our health team recognise that a massive contributor to this is the problem of long waiting lists. For example, Sheffield has an effective 2,000-year wait for a neurodiversity assessment. The sick are staying sick for longer and therefore needing more time off work. And this is a ball and chain on our economic growth. Therefore, it's good to hear invest to save becoming party policy in the last motion, and the point to be stressed by both Lisa Smart and Bobby Dean. Across the NHS, short-termism is rife. Innovation is stifled by penny pinching, and efficiency savings became false economies long ago. An example, cutting staffing to the bare minimum has created a dependence on expensive locum agencies. Surely reallocating budgets to recruit more permanent staff would be more economical. As a counterpoint, ambitious Lib Dem staffing policies such as recruiting, training and retaining a net gain of 8,000 GPs, a policy that, if it were enacted, would likely save millions in hospital attendances. I say it again, invest to save. In the general election, I recruited a new volunteer who, in his own words, described Keir Starmer as a diet Tory. I don't think he's far wrong. For all his talk of change, so far he's positioned himself as the austeronomics continuity candidate. Beyond health, and given cuts upon cuts to local government, schools, and other public services, I wonder if invest to save should not only be our health policy, but our wider economic mantra, as we establish ourselves as the de facto opposition to the diet Tories.
Thank you. I now ask Eleanor Kelly to stand by, and I now call Richard Kilpatrick from Manchester Local Party.
Now, Conference, I'll let you into a secret. Those of us that face the Labour Party across the country have been accused by them of delivering austerity. We were told that a Labour government would fix the local government finance, deliver investment, provide economic growth, protect the vulnerable, and end decades of Tory austerity. So, Conference, credit where credit is due. Labour have ended Tory austerity and replaced it with their own. Refusing to scrap the two-child tax credit cap, removing the winter fuel allowance, hinting at ending the single-person discount on council tax, and this is just the start. I did, to be honest, Conference, get a little bit suspicious when the Labour playbook changed. It was edited. They started using words like fiscally prudent and economically sensible. Now, let's be clear, the only thing that the Labour Party have been economical with is the truth. Sat in hustings as Labour candidates, now MPs, promised to scrap the cap. It is up to every single one of us to hold them to account. And Conference, a Liberal Democrat vision for our economy must be first based in doing good for our residents, our constituents and the country, making a difference in people's lives, showing people what change actually looks like, which is why we must rise to the challenges of our society, the society and issues that we face today, a modern social giants that we must wrestle with, a social care system fit to provide the dignity we all deserve, a childcare system that works for the modern workforce. 2 years ago, Conference, I slept on the floor of a care home waiting for my mum to pass away. I stayed there days and nights for 2.5 weeks as she succumbed to dementia and cancer. I saw the absolute best of people in our care system and, quite frankly, the appalling conditions that we ask caregivers to work in. Dignity in death is a human right, and a modern economy must do more to provide us with all the dignity as we get older. And Conference, we also must not allow people to choose between a career and a family. We must do more to build an economy that provides for the needs of modern young families, ones that are hit by the cost of living crisis and a broken housing market. So, Conference, I ask that we keep clear the priorities of the British people, renew our commitment to finding solutions to the big social issues of our generation, and heed the reminder
that the Labour Party is not the party of change. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you. I now call Eleanor Kelly, who has been nominated by FPC to sum up today's discussion.
Conference, I'm really proud to be speaking to you today, not in my usual capacity as a member of the Federal Conference Committee or the Liberal Democrat Women Executive, but in my new appointment as the Vice Chair of the Policy Review Working Group. The Federal Policy Committee asked me to respond to this topical debate today on behalf of the working group. Its Chair, Ed Davey, and the 20 party members from all corners of the party who make it up. Policy wonks, dedicated activists, local councillors and of course parliamentarians who will be working over the next 12 months to produce the policy review paper which we will be presenting at Autumn Conference 2025. Over the next year, we'll be assessing the landscape of British politics, understanding the new government, opposition parties and of course the British public, and identifying the major challenges that our country faces over the coming years. From there, we will be reviewing the party's current policy book and identifying the chapters of it which are in need of development, applying the lessons that we learned in the general election and, of course, our core Liberal Democrat values. We will create a roadmap for development for party policy and set out our vision for a free, fair and open society. So no biggie. And Conference, the biggest part of our task is going to be simply listening to you, which is why I'm so chuffed to have watched this debate this morning. I'm sure you'll agree how great it is to hear impassioned speeches and expertise. Duncan, thank you for taking the time to get this on the agenda and start this big conversation about Labour's economic policy and the Liberal Democrat vision for long-term prosperity. And Sarah, thank you so much for setting out how our biggest ever parliamentary team are already leading the way on this, holding the Conservatives to account for the damage they caused and already holding Labour to account for the mistakes they are making. And Paul for highlighting the need to focus on those left out and left behind in our economy, and everybody else for covering issues as wide-ranging from housing to Europe, just in case you hadn't got those on your conference bingo card already. And thank you for starting this conversation, but it's a conversation that's going to keep going, not just about the economy, but the full scope of issues facing our country, from public services to civil liberties, from science and technology to foreign affairs. And we would like to invite you, actually, to attend our consultative session this afternoon at 3 p.m. Myself, Jeremy Hargreaves and Lucy Nethsinger from the Federal Policy Committee will be here on this stage listening to your ideas from the conference floor. But again, it ain't ending this afternoon. It's our job to ensure that wherever the Policy Review Working Group goes, the party is right behind it. So whether you represent your state, your region, or one of our brilliant affiliated organisations, we need you, because it's simply an impossible task without. So one last time, let's say thank you to everybody who has spoken today on behalf of the Federal Policy Committee and the new Policy Review Working Group. Conference, you are what is going to make this.
Thank you. I would like to thank my aide, Nick DaCosta, and my hall aide, Fraser Graham. And I'm now handing over to Callum Robertson to chair the next session, which is a speech by Munira Wilson MP. Thank you, Conference.
Good morning, everyone. We are now beginning F19, which is a speech by our education spokesperson and the Member of Parliament for Twickenham, Munira Wilson.
Good morning, conference. On Monday, the 10th of June, something extraordinary happened. Yes, there was the launch of some Liberal Democrat manifesto, but I'll come back to that. No, what was extraordinary was that I, Munira Wilson, finally became the cool parent. Why? Because my boss, Ed Davey, asked me to go on a roller coaster with him. And suddenly, having a politician as a mum sounded way more fun. At least that's what I'd hoped. Turns out when I got home and we watched the news that evening, my 10-year-old daughter declared that I was weird and embarrassing. But I don't care, conference, because I had a whale of a time. In fact, when all the cameras had gone, Bobby Dean and I went on the biggest, scariest ride we could find. I'm a bit surprised that the press team didn't stop us, because stealth does 0 to 80 in 1.8 seconds. And the rain was lashing down so hard that it closed for safety reasons immediately after we got off the ride. So, given that nominations had closed, consider yourselves all lucky that you're not out delivering leaflets in a double by-election right now. Instead, what happened? Well, Bobby just went and won Carl Shelton and Wallington by almost 8,000 votes. And yes, conference, what a campaign it was. 72 Liberal Democrat MPs tearing down the blue wall, brick by brick. But now we have a serious job to do. While the Conservatives are divided and hopelessly adrift, we must be the constructive opposition. Where they took people for granted, we must campaign with care and compassion. When Labour repeats the mistakes of the past, we must hold them to account. And where the country cries out for change, we must be bold and ambitious. And no more is this needed than in our nurseries, our schools, our colleges, and our universities. Because our children have been sidelined for too long. It has always been our Liberal mission to put them, children, the very future of our country, at the heart of our policy making. Not just when we were in government, but every day in town halls up and down the country. For my message is this: our nation is bursting with ambition. People young and old who work and study hard, who have hopes and dreams for themselves, their families, and their communities. And Liberal Democrats, we can provide the vision, the positive policies to help them get there. Now, during the campaign, we all met families like this on the doorstep. Parents who drive hour-long round trips to take their children to a sports match or a music rehearsal, or take on second jobs to put food on the table for their families. All hope that their children might have opportunities that they never had. They know that education is the best investment we can make in our children's potential and our country's future growth. Education turbocharges talent. It cultivates creativity and it creates conscientious citizens. And they looked to the Conservatives to make that investment. But what did they get? Teacher training targets missed for 8 of the last 9 years. Nurseries ordered to expand rapidly with no proper plan to fund it. A decade's work closing the attainment gap wiped out by a lack of investment in COVID catch-up. 1 in 5 people aged 8 to 25 with a probable mental health disorder. Opportunities for our young people to live, work, and study in Europe snatched away from them. This is the Tories' toxic legacy that the new government must now clean up. But one legacy haunts me most of all. I will never forget last summer getting a call out of the blue from the schools minister. He would tell me that thousands of children would miss their first day back at school because their buildings were full of crumbling concrete and were not safe to open. Through years of neglect, the Conservatives had failed the most basic of its duties in government, to keep our children safe. Well, by the end, the Conservatives were negligent, unfit to govern, and boy, did the public know it. Now, you know the 9 education secretaries we had in just 8 years? Do you know what happened to them? Well, there was Nadeem Zahawi, who stood down in Stratford-on-Avon. Who's the new MP there? It's Manuela Pertegela of the Liberal Democrats. Then there was Michelle, Secretary of State for 48 Hours, Donnellan. Her constituency got split in 2. Anyone know who won both of them? Thank you. And of course, who can forget Gillian Keegan? She told us she was the only one sat on her arse doing nothing. Well, we decided to get off ours and win her seat as well. Yes, Conference, for a decade, ambitious Conservative ministers used the Department for Education only as a step on the greasy pole. Well, it turns out too much grease and you all slip right back down that pole again. So it now falls to Bridget Phillipson and Labour to clean up the toxic mess. And she will achieve far more than her predecessors by simply staying in the job. Our nurseries, schools, colleges and universities will benefit hugely from stability and continuity. So Liberal Democrats will work constructively with the government to fix the foundations. Already we have seen small, positive steps, protecting BTECs, reforming Ofsted inspections, and ending the Tories' pointless, phony war against our universities so that the government will once again champion them as powerhouses of learning and research, economic growth, and soft power. But the cleanup requires far more than just tinkering. Too much damage has been done. Take our early years sector. The expansion of free childcare hours has cross-party support, but the Conservatives did nothing to prepare the ground for what was to come. There was no discussion with providers, a hopelessly unrealistic timetable, and no proper funding plan. The result? Chaos. Conference, for our early years sector to succeed, childcare must be flexible, affordable, and fair. We need to attract and retain more staff, boost the early years pupil premium, and expand the entitlement for disadvantaged children so that those who benefit most from early help will not lose out. And crucially, we must review the funding rates so that our nurseries and preschools can meet the actual costs of delivering high-quality early years education. And where do I start with special educational needs? A system where tens of thousands of parents must fight the council in the courts to get the support that is their child's legal right. When parents win almost 98 times out of 100, you know the system is broken. A system where the only reason why dozens of councils aren't bankrupt is because they can keep SEND support off the balance sheet. Liberal Democrats have plenty of positive proposals to bring to the table. Ideas such as a new national funding body so that the most severely disabled children can have their support paid for centrally, freeing up our councils to help others in need. On early years, SEND and more, we will be a constructive opposition to Labour. Yet in other parts of our education system, we must call them out for the mistakes they have and they will make. No one can doubt the scale of the mess they inherited, but in trying to look too tough, they too risk showing a lack of care and compassion, values that drew millions of voters to the Liberal Democrat cause. Take child poverty. There's a constituent of mine who told me that she stopped buying her medication so that her daughter at college could afford some lunch. I've heard stories of pupils pretending to eat out of empty lunchboxes to hide from their friends that there's no food at home. That cannot be right in modern Britain. Scrapping the two-child benefit would lift 300,000 children out of poverty. Its impact would be immediate and cost-effective, but Keir Starmer said no, and he suspended any Labour MP who defied him. A free school meal for every child in poverty would give 900,000 more pupils a full stomach each lunchtime. That means better progress, better behaviour and concentration, better health outcomes. But Labour have stayed silent. Meanwhile, our teachers feel at times like the fourth emergency service, filling in for under-resourced public services across the country. Poverty and mental ill health are driving staggering numbers of children to miss lessons. And because roughly half of mental health conditions begin before the age of 14, Liberal Democrats will keep making the case for a dedicated, qualified mental health professional in every school, primary and secondary. You know, I remember the mother of a 7-year-old who came to my surgery. Her daughter had been waiting 16 months for a mental health assessment, and she was told she may have to wait a further year still. She is a little girl who should be enjoying play dates, parties, and playgrounds. Instead, her mother told me she isn't really living, just existing. This is the scale of the crisis we face, and I fear Labour haven't grasped it. They urgently need to expand their own mental health plans to include primary schools as well. Now, the government cannot ignore these injustices by locking itself in a doom spiral, saying that things must get worse before they get better. Because investing in our young people, in their future, is what drags us out of the mess we are in. Education fights against poverty, ignorance, and conformity. It grows our economy and it improves our health outcomes, generating returns for generations to come. Liberal Democrats, we choose to invest in education so that our nation is equipped to tackle the challenges of our age. Families up and down the country simply can't afford to wait. But there's a second mistake Labour is also making. Too often, they get in the way of ambition that people have for themselves, their families, and for their communities. Parents will move heaven and earth to give their children a good start in life. They will do all they can to give them the opportunities they never had. But Labour's stance on private schools is just a divisive distraction, particularly for those families of children with SEND who tried time and time again to find a state school for their child, but they just couldn't thrive and they just couldn't make it work. So, conference, to keep hold of voters' trust, you must deliver the change that matches the ambition people have. You have to listen to their hopes, their dreams for their children. And you've got to say, we want that too, and here's how we're going to help. It's why Liberal Democrats introduced the pupil premium, giving schools the freedom and the funding to boost the attainment of children from low-income backgrounds. It's why we're now campaigning to extend it to colleges too. It's why we push for closer ties with Europe to broaden our young people's horizons by rejoining Erasmus and signing a youth mobility scheme. And it's why we would raise the apprenticeship minimum wage and roll out lifelong skills grants, opening up opportunities for learners of all ages to train and upskill. And it's why, conference, yesterday you called for a tutoring guarantee in all state schools and colleges. 12 weeks of small group teaching for nearly 2 million young people in subjects such as English, maths, or science, rocket boosting not only their performance, but their confidence and their school attendance too. Because we are not prepared to let unfulfilled potential be something that only a privileged few can afford to unlock. Conference, this is the politics of ambition, empowering our educators so that they can unleash our children's potential to flourish. Listen to what Dylan, a college student, had to say about the tutoring he received. I dreaded maths, he said, because I didn't enjoy it, but my tutoring sessions were amazing, and they really helped boost my confidence in maths. When I found out I passed my maths GCSE, I literally was flabbergasted. Liberal Democrats, I want 2 million more Dylans in this country because the hope and excitement he had of fresh opportunities to progress his studies and pursue his dreams, well, that is just priceless. And this is my goal in this Parliament and beyond, to see a generation of young people free to pursue their dreams. Where their classrooms are crumbling and their nurseries are full, we will hold the government's feet to the fire. Where the Conservatives lack care and compassion, we will offer hope. Where Labour lack ambition, we will show parents and pupils that we share their hopes and dreams. Fighting to fix the early years and the high needs postcode lottery, campaigning tirelessly for free school meals and a counsellor in every school, making the case to turbocharge tutoring and broadening our children's horizons. Ambition and optimism, care and compassion, hope and opportunity. That is the Liberal Democrat mission. That is our job. Let's get to work.
Thank you to Munira for that fantastic speech. We're now going to move to the lunch break. So the hall will be empty from now until 2 o'clock, where we will get started with F20, which is a Q&A session with the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Edward Davey.